point out two things. One thing is internal for Muslims, and one thing is external. The external thing is there's a lot of things being said that are completely illogical. And the knowledge that you use, the tools that you use to disprove atheists are the same tools to disprove this stuff, because Allah calls us to the truth, not theological truth only. Truth of oppression is also part of the haqq, right? And Israel has a right to defend itself is very clever, right? It was a very clever shubha, because the premise is there. And what Iblis does is he sneaks in a premise, okay? And he covers it with emotion. The snuck premise is that you're the victim, because only a victim defends himself, right? And the emotion there is that, hey, I'm attacked. Look how brilliant this was as a phrase, who came up with this? What marketing agency deserves $1 billion who came up with this, a statement that really inside of it is all sorts of falsehood. Yes, everyone has a right to defend themselves. No one's going to say anything bad about that, but you can't defend yourself, logically cannot defend yourself when you're an aggressor, right? So that's where the snuck premise is. So talk to us a little bit about the use of the tools that you've been working on dealing with atheists as they transfer over now to a real-time human conflict, and all the misrepresentation, misinformation you've been seeing out there, false arguments that you've been seeing out there. Because I have others. We'll talk about another one, inshallah. But I want to hear from you first.
So with regards to the horrific situation that's happening at the moment, when people articulate a statement or a phrase, you should always understand that every statement, every phrase has its own presuppositions or assumptions. There is something logically that sits behind the phrase. For example, when they say Israel has a right to defend itself, when you start thinking about, okay, intuitively that sounds okay, but what does that really mean? That means that there is an assumption that they are being attacked.
Yeah.
There is an assumption that they are not the aggressor. There is an assumption that they have articulated this phrase, and they're assuming that something has just started. So when you unpack these assumptions, you need to question, okay, are these assumptions coherent? Are they sound? Are they based on any evidence? So when we talk about the assumption that Israel is not the aggressor, then all you have to do is literally do a Google search and look at the multiple human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, read the books by Jewish academics like Ilan Pappé and Lowenstein and many others. They all conclude that for 70 years, more than 70 years, there's been an illegal occupation. For decades, there's been an apartheid regime. For decades, there was ethnic cleansing. When you look into, for example, the Nakba, you see that there are around, I think, 600 villages that were burnt to the ground. The wells were poisoned, so people can't return. Over around 750,000 Palestinians were actually ethnically cleansed with no right to return. When you start looking at various UN reports, you would see that these refugees have a legal right to return. So when you see the context of apartheid, of ethnic cleansing, of aggression, for example, before October the 7th, from around 2021 to August 2023, around 130 Palestinian children were killed in cold blood by IDF forces. Where was the international outrage? This is selective empathy, selective sympathy. So when you understand now there is a context where Israel is the aggressor, and that the whole so-called conflict or crisis didn't begin on October the 7th, it reframes the whole narrative. And then you say, hold on a second. If you're the aggressor, the oppressor, the killer, you have taken hundreds of children into prison illegally, which is technically hostages. Where are all these Palestinian hostages, these children?
Yep.
No one's saying nothing about them. Where are the news channels talking about these children? So when you look at all of this evidence, genocide, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, even torture, and so on and so forth, you would now understand as the Zionist entity being the aggressor. Therefore, when they say we have a right to defend ourselves, is ridiculous. It's like someone is assaulting somebody else, and the one who's committing the assault says, I have a right to defend myself against my victim. I mean, what kind of nonsense is this? Mohammed Hijab put it quite nicely on the Piers Morgan show. He said, it's like a rapist defending themselves from their victim.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're already in an aggressive stance. They're already in an illegal stance, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is, which is connected to what I just said, it assumes that something has just began. No, we need to reframe the narrative and get them to realize, don't assume that the crisis started on October the 7th. We've had 7 decades of illegal occupation, decades of apartheid, decades of killing, hundreds of children killed, even one would argue even a whole decade of bombing, right? Every couple of years, Gaza has been, literally carpet bombed. You have even Arab Israeli citizens being treated like third-class citizens. You have Palestinians being treated, worse than animals. So from this perspective, we see that there has been an ongoing aggression going on, okay? So what we've just done is we've reframed the narrative by saying, well, hold on a second. Your statement assumes that you are not the aggressor, that you're the victim. But in the grand cosmic scheme of things on this issue, you are actually the oppressor. You are tyrannical. You are a terrorist state. You're an apartheid state. And it reframes the whole narrative. And we say it didn't just start on October the 7th. So all you need to do is listen to a statement and understand, what does that statement assume? You unpack 1, 2, 3 assumptions, and then you question, are those assumptions sound? Do they have evidence for them? Are they coherent? Do they logically make sense? And then you look for any evidence for or against. And in this case, there's an overwhelming evidence against the false assumptions of the false statement of Israel has a right to defend itself. Yeah. So this is a very, very important way of dealing with things. Every time someone makes a statement, a presupposition, or an assertion, understand there are assumptions behind that. You unpack what those assumptions are. You question if they have any justification, any evidence, and you question whether if they're logically coherent. And then once you unpack that, then you're able to basically respond in a particular way. And you could do the same thing with the LGBTQ plus ideology, for example. The whole kind of narrative is that same-sex intercourse is totally fine and gender fluidity is not immoral. It's acceptable. Now that statement itself has certain assumptions. Yeah. One of those assumptions are that they believe they have absolute ownership over their own bodies. Therefore, they could do whatever they want with it. That goes against, the lordship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he is the master, owner, maintainer, creator of everything that exists, including our bodies. Yep. Yes, we have agency, but ultimately Allah owns us, so he has every right to tell us what to do with our bodies. So that's a very quick way of dealing with one of the assumptions. Another assumption that they have is there's nothing immoral. And they would cite, for example, utilitarian ethics or deontological ethics. You're like, well, we are under no epistemic and moral obligation to adopt utilitarianism and deontological ethics. We are divine command theorists. And then what you say is, well, I disagree with your normative ethical theory. This is about moral epistemology. I don't have to agree with that. Why is it objectively true to adopt a utilitarian or deontological paradigm? I'm adopting divine command theory, and I can prove that these commands are from Allah, and I can prove the commands of Allah are the thing to follow. And therefore, whatever Allah says that we should do is morally good, and what Allah prohibits, it's morally bad. So you just unpack that. Again, they have this whole idea of gender fluidity, which is based on applied postmodern principles, 2 applied extensions of postmodern principles. One is hyperskepticism, and the other one is basically there are social hierarchies that dictate what can be known or not known, and what can be known is perpetuated with the use of language. And within that, they believe that language does not represent reality, which is not the Islamic discourse, because Allah taught the names of things to Adam. So the first point about hyperskepticism, they basically say that there is no method to formulate an objective truth. Oh, okay, well, I don't have to adopt that. How is that true? How is that assumption coherent? because we can provide methods that can actually produce truths that are representation of reality. So we're not hyper-skeptical. And the reason they're hyper-skeptical is that they're like, well, we disagree with categorizations. We disagree with gender normativity. We disagree with these things because it comes from what you call biology. And they reject any form of biological essentialism, and even a moderate form, because generally speaking, academics are moderate biological essentialists. They don't believe everything is biology. It's a combination of biology and socialization, which is in line with the Quranic discourse. But they reject all of it. They're very skeptical about scientific truths and categories. So that's why they would say, it's gender fluid. You make it up yourself. And also they say that we live in social hierarchies with oppressive power structures, and they tell us what could be known or not known, and that's perpetuated with the use of language. They say, no, we should reject this because you could change the power structure and change the language, therefore you change what you believe to be true with regards to gender. And, they adopt this kind of Derridian understanding, another French thinker, because the kind of language issue was also based on Foucault, his idea of discourses and his idea of power. And it's quite funny that most of these stupid ideas come from French thinkers. And Foucault was a very immoral human being.
Bro, this is one of the worst people. He's one of the worst people on the earth, this guy.
Yeah, he raped Tunisian boys in graveyards. And he had his huge piece of work on the history of Western sexuality. But anyway, so the Derridian understanding of language is that language doesn't represent reality, it's relational. And it's based on structures, and it's phallogocentric, meaning it has a male-centric bias. So they say, when you say what is the opposite of male, you would say female. So it's relational. It doesn't represent a reality, it's relational. And it has its own kind of hierarchy, which is phallogocentric or androcentric based on the man. We don't adopt that view of language. We have Allah taught the names of things to Adam alayhi salam. When you look at the tafsir, this means the properties, the features, and so on and so forth. So I know that I'm going too much into this. There's much more to unpack as well. We've got an essay coming out on this, by the way. But that is another way of unpacking 3 quick assumptions of the LGBTQ ideological discourse. It's based on assumptions. And we need to be able to have this critical thinking, because the Quranic discourse does this for us. Allah questions certain assumptions or the implied assumptions in people's discourse, right? About when the Arabs said we're going to follow our forefathers, Allah addresses it. You're going to follow them even if it's based on falsehood, right? Check out, what is the basis of what you're following? Is it coherent? Is it sound? Is it true? Does it have evidence? So this was actually a very good question. So in a nutshell, anyone makes a statement, understand there is no such thing as a statement or an idea or an assertion that is assumption-less. Everything has its own assumptions. Some assumptions are coherent and rational. Other assumptions are incoherent and they're unsound, they're not rational. And our job is to unpack what those assumptions are and to discuss them.
I'm telling you, this crisis is opening a lot of people's eyes to a lot of things. First of all, there are the visuals, and how do we recognize a sound, visual, video, or image as proof, as evidence? So we're learning some epistemology there, right? An image today almost means nothing. A video is probably still a piece of evidence if it has context around it, that you could tell what time and place this occurred. Thirdly, we have now arguments like this. Now, let me give you another argument that I find repeated all over the place, and many different